My name is Daniel Cook of the University of Dundee. It's a great pleasure to be giving this joint lecture on behalf of the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club and the University of Edinburgh. This talk is titled Scott's Wandering Tales. But first, some thank yous. Thank you to the Council of the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club and to the Department of English at the University of Edinburgh for the invitation for this talk. I also wish to thank Michael Wood and Lee Simpson for their technical support. It goes without saying that I'm disappointed not to be in Edinburgh with you for this talk, but we're restrained by the circumstances surrounding COVID-19. Certainly, I hope to join you in Edinburgh along with the rest of the world for the Scott celebrations in 2021. But let me turn to today's talk, Scott's Wandering Tales. Scott's shorter fictions came in different shapes and sizes and continue to live in different types of publications, whether it's the periodical, short story collection, anthology, gift book, or multi-volume novel, or even graphic novels, comics, and short films. Extracted from Red Gauntlet, Wandering Willie's Tale is typically anthologized as one of the first modern Scottish short stories, sometimes even the very first. But it is not even Walter Scott's first major short story. That would be The Fortunes of Martin Waldeck, an interpolated tale included in the second volume of his third novel, The Antiquary. After that, two pieces appeared in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine that have been securely attributed to Scott. Alarming increase of depravity among animals, a sort of Swiftian satire, and Phantasmagoria, a kind of anti-Gothic story told by a sentient shadow. So both pieces are highly experimental. In the shorter fiction volume for the Edinburgh edition of the Waverley novels, Graham Tulloch and Judy King include an even earlier work, The Inferno of Altazadora, which first appeared in Edinburgh Annual Register in 1811. They also include Christopher Corduroy, which appeared in the Sale Room for 1817. A third major interpolated tale, Donna Hugel's narrative, appeared of Anne of Geierstein, or The Maiden in the Mist, towards the end of Scott's career. Plus, there's Pizarro, an unfinished novella about a bandit in Italy. And then there's Chronicles of the Canongate, a story cycle of sorts, comprising at least two short stories and a novella, plus some framing narrative that I think qualifies as short stories in their own right. In the present talk, I'm going to look at just one of what I am calling the Wandering Tales, the perfectly named, very popular and extraordinary piece, Wandering Willie's Tale. For our purposes today, a wandering tale is a short story that can feasibly stand apart from the novel in which it first appeared, but whose textual mobility depends on and can even have an impact upon the host novel. Scott also surrounds his wandering tales with fictional audiences who comment on the meaning of the story delivered in real time, hijacking the conventions of improvisatory oral storytelling. Wandering tales appear to be digressive, but they're equally propulsive. Symbolism buried or prominently displayed within the story may take on sudden significance later in the novel. Sometimes the level of significance may be structurally integral, or it may be a throwaway remark. Willie's arrival in Red Gauntlet ahead of his delivery positions him as a master storyteller, ambling over the Lee with the confident air of an experienced pilot, whistling several bars with great precision from an overture of Corelli. We also quickly learn that the affable piper has a broad range. He says, When I am tired of scraping them or singing ballads, I whiles many a tale serve the turn among the country bodies. By his own claim, he is especially skilled in supernatural tales. I have some fearsome ones that make the old carlines shake on the settle and the bits of bands scale on their minnies out for their beds. A fan of tales of superstition, as it happens, the law student Darcy Latimer begged to have a sample from Willie. Sample here implies smallness, even incompleteness, but an experienced tale-teller can marshal materials as the audience needs. And we are in perfect hands with Wandering Willie. If the student is an audience surrogate, he is an unusually prominent one. Willie duly delivers a masterclass in a distinct narrative tone of voice, which he raised and depressed with considerable skill, so we're told. I will not spare you a syllable of it, although it be of the longest, Darcy Latimer writes to Alan Fairford. So I make a dash and begin. Without wishing to downplay the orality of the story, I regard Wandering Willie's tale, this version at least, to be knowingly textual. The typographical dash fixes the words to the printed page. And Scott also uses lots of printerly devices such as italics to shape his story on the page in front of us. As Penny Fielding amply demonstrates, Scott's story as written thrives on the creative possibilities of oral recreation, as opposed to documentary reproduction in the construction of historical narratives. And as Alison Lumsden reminds us, the label tale used in the story's title, as marked out clearly in the heading of letter 11 within the novel, occupies the liminal space between a formal prose narrative and an oral performance. After all, Scott subtitled Red Gauntlet with A Tale of the 18th Century, which is more in keeping with the formal openness of the European conte tradition, as it comprises letters, journals, folk tales, songs, family chronicles, law cases, stage comedy, and other pluralized forms. If a tale is to survive, it needs a willing community of listeners and a capable storyteller who can shape the material for that specific audience. David Brown calls Wandering Willie's tale a problematic digression, but I think such a claim downplays the improvisatory skill of Wandering Willie, who is a sort of historical artist invested in and the current proprietor of a common stock of fictional truth, to adopt Brian Nellist's phrase. Let's have a quick look at another Wandering tale as an example. In The Antiquary, Isabella Warder relies on the fraudulent Doster Wissel for the outline of her wandering German story, The Fortunes of Martin Waldeck. That's an antiquary's error, relying on misinformed materials. Materials obtained from a crook, no less. A knowing fraud. And she relinquishes control of the material to the story's reader or enactor, the reluctant Lovell, who is assigned to read the story out loud in front of the audience. She had hoped for one of the elder antiquaries to bring it to life. That is the cause of her perceived failure among her in-text audience. Curling up his nose in distaste of the supernatural, Oldbuck ironically quotes poetry to assert his preference for solid antiquarian inquiry. He quotes from T.J. Matthias, The Pursuits of Literature. I bear an English heart unused at ghosts and rattling bones to start. And of course, Scott was not alone in the period in collapsing antiquarian and poetic registers. Here there's a lovely irony in the stuffy Oldbuck, failing to make that distinction clear. A verbal palimpsest of the heard and overheard, the witnessed and the half-seen, Wandering Willie's tale is best read not as a single story, as Brown's phrasing implies, but as a series of visceral episodes expertly knit together by Willie as a means of enacting a palpable past. And he uses various literary genres, fictional genres, to make this possible. Wandering Willie's tale operates its own mythopoeic process, offering a cogent view of the effects of the decay of feudal paternalism on the peasantry of a generation or so prior, as represented by the story's protagonist, Willie's own grandfather. The novel itself, Red Gauntlet, as Brown recognizes, provides other views of the same historical process. We have Darcy's escape from his hereditary obligations finally to be weighed against the tragic fate of Red Gauntlet himself, so Brown claims. Convincingly, I think. The tale can be both the symbolic centre of the entire novel, as Edgar Johnson has it, or an extractable parable about courage and prudence, as Francis R. Hart claims, or even a prefiguration of a future plotline and a flagrant commentary on the violent history of Scotland as presented here. Let's not forget, Willie is not the only significant tale-teller in the novel. Lilius, Maxwell, and even Red Gauntlet also deliver stories relating to incidents in the Red Gauntlet family history and its vexed relationship with the history of Scotland. The wandering tale-teller cannily brings in enough of the supernatural to give it the air of an old Scottish folk tale, as David Daish has it, yet enough shrewd and humorous realism to make it also a critical piece about master-servant relations in old Scotland, so he goes on to say. Willie's supernatural tale is grounded in Scottish history. He chiefly focuses on two figures, Sir Robert Red Gauntlet, a 17th-century anti-covenanting royalist, and Steenie Stinson, Wandering Willie's Piper grandfather, a hardened survivor of wars and rebellions. Willie brings the main antagonist vividly to life. Glen, nor Dougal, nor mountain, nor cave could hide the poor hillfolk when Red Gauntlet was out with bugle and bloodhound after them as if they had been so many deer. Steenie, a piper, is one of the fearsome landlord's tenants, and patently a favourite with Red Gauntlet and his loyal butler, Dougal MacCallum. With the Hanoverian succession underway, we're briefly led to believe that Red Gauntlet and his employees will be punished. Wheel, round came the revolution, and it had like to have broken hearts baith of Dougal and his master. But, with quite literally the next word, the change was not altogether so great as they feared, and their lives continue as before, albeit with some significant financial loss. To recover the lifestyle to which he had been accustomed, he becomes an even greedier landlord, and we can almost see the change happen in his physicality. His face looked as gash and ghastly as Satan's. Steenie, dropping off his fees and waiting for his legal documentation one day, watches in shock as the landlord meets a sudden, devilish demise. Terribly, the laird roared for cold water to his feet and wine to cool his throat, and hell, 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 and its flames was all the word in his mouth. They brought him water, and when they plunged his swollen feet into the tub, he cried out it was burning, and folks say that it did bubble and sparkle like a seething cauldron. He flung the cup at Dougal's head and said he had given him blood instead of burgundy, and sure enough, the lass washed clotted blood off the carpet the next day. It's an incredibly vivid passage, and it's almost happening in front of our very eyes, and our ears rattle with the language and description on display here. Willie's telling mingles the dramatic and the speculative, the actual and the figurative. Folks say that it did bubble and sparkle like a seething cauldron. And who are we to disagree? His folkloric description relies on rapidly transformative language. They plunged his swollen feet into the tub. It's almost as if we can see the feet swelling before our very eyes. And the verbs could hardly be more insistent. Roared, plunged, cried, flung. This is further underscored by the quiet grimness of the servant later washing clotted blood off the carpet. Kind of an after scene, if you like, as the kind of scene we don't often get in literature. The day after, the cleanup. And that carpet cleaning also confirms the grisly truth from a historical point of view, as it were. Sure enough, it was not wine in the glass. Scarpering from the scene, Steenie becomes a mere bystander, a character at best. But by implication, he is the sole source for Willie, save for Dougal the servant and a jabbering jackanape, Major Weir. Steenie hears the shrieks that grew fainter and fainter, but it is the storyteller, Willie, who ultimately shapes the scene and reshapes the scene as he wishes. With Steenie outside of the house, Willie can only speculate on the actions Dougal took next. Even so, he chooses to present the account as matter of fact, thereby realigning our perspective with his. The night before the funeral, Dougal could keep his anchantal no longer. He drinks brandy in his room with Hutcheon, another servant, for about an hour, during which time he sternly informs him that his master's service bell continues to ring even after his death, the master's death. Refusing to break my service to Sir Robert, he vows to answer the next call with the help of Hutcheon. Both servants enter accidentally into miniature Gothic story, a ghost story, no less. When midnight came and the house was quiet as the grave, sure enough, the silver whistle sounded as sharp and shrill as if Sir Robert was blowing it, and got up the twa old serving men and tottered into the room where the dead man lay. Hutcheon saw enough at the first glance, for there were torches in the room which showed him the foul fiend in his shape, sitting on the laird's coffin. Over he coped as if he had been dead. He couldn't tell how long he lay in a trance at the door, but when he gathered himself, he cried on his neighbour, and getting no answer, raised the house, when Dougal was found lying dead within 2 steps of the bed where his master's coffin was placed. As for the whistle, it was again ans and aye, but many a time was it heard on the top of the house on the bartizan, and among the old chimneys and turrets where the howlets have their nests. And again, it's an incredibly vivid passage, and it's almost happening before our very eyes and ringing in our very ears. It's a very immersive type of storytelling. Within a single paragraph, Willie has set up a dark mystery, the ringing of the bell. He racks up dread as the servants pursue the sound. He delivers a death and establishes the legendary aftermath of the episode. The bell continues to ring. It's a miniature Gothic story. The new laird, Sir Robert's son, Sir John, enters the tale and quickly hushed the matter up, effectively ending that Gothic story, mini-story. Is the story finished, literally and figuratively? Is it all over now? Not quite. A new episode begins. Seeking to settle the affairs of the estate, Sir John calls every tenant to meet with him. During his turn, Steenie rewrites history, out of politeness more than anything else. Your father was a kind man to friends and followers, he says, somewhat diplomatically. Sir John accepts the compliment, but moves on to his main order of business. Here he opened the fatal volume. Not a Gothic novel, but more mundanely, we might think, his rental book, an historical document. Switching to theatrical dialogue, with their names marked out on the printed page like actors' prompts, Willie ramps up the tension of the ensuing scene. The new landlord does not believe that Steenson has paid his father. Sir John, I have little doubt you borrowed the money, Steenie. It is the payment that I want to have some proof of. Sir John becomes increasingly frustrated. The laird, assuming a look of his father, a very particular Anne, it seemed as if the rankles of his own frown made that self-same fearsome shape of a horse's shoe in the midst of his brow. The vividness of the image hints at a renewal of the demonic Gothicism of Sir Robert's death, almost as if the story is about to repeat itself with the new laird in place. But thinking about the detail in the context of the larger novel, some 100 pages or so later, this image takes on another role within Red Gauntlet, as Latimer learns the truth of his own heritage when he sees on his uncle's face the same mark, not unaptly described in the wandering tale that we're currently looking at. With remarkable control over his materials, even in sampling them for the law student, Scott demonstrates a powerful way in which a tightly woven interpolated tale can still impact the main novel much later on. So this is a really good example of what I mean when I refer to a wandering tale as both digressive, it is a story on its own terms, and propulsive. It can move the main story along, even in seemingly incidental detail. Harangued, Steenson blurts out an unkind response to Sir John's demand for an answer. Where is the money? In hell, if you have my thoughts on it, said my good sire, driven to extremity. In hell with your father and his silver whistle. This flippant remark will become a reality in the book soon enough. Steenson flees again, as he did after the sudden death of Sir Robert. However, he cannot convince anyone. He is, in a rhetorical sense, a failed storyteller at this point. When he told his story, he got but the worst word in his wham. Thief, beggar, diver were the safest terms. A new story begins. Steenson rides home alone for the word of Pitt Markey, a wonderful, poetical, but highly fictional name, evoking atmospheric dreariness, Pitt and Mark meaning dark or gloomy. I ken the word, Willie claims, but the furs may be black or white for what I can tell. Briefly stopping at Tibby Ford's small change house, he downs a brandy, raising an ironic toast to the memory of Sir Robert. Might he never lie quiet in his grave till he had righted his poor bond tenant. And again, this petulant comment will soon become a textual reality, almost as if Steenie Steenson is a storyteller by accident, and whatever he thinks or says comes into existence. He is more than a character, he is a creator, in other words. He just doesn't know it, within the story at least. On he rode, little caring where, when his horse suddenly began to spring and flee and sturt. A mysterious stranger enters and quietens the horse. But something about the stranger's aspect half angers, half frightens Steenson, even though he claims he only wants to help. It's an innocent remark. So, my good sire, to ease his own heart, more than from any hope of help, told him the story from beginning to end. So now Stevenson has become a storyteller almost as a sort of an economic exchange. I'll give you my story, and that will shape our upcoming relationship, our exchange with the stranger. And this time, Stevenson is a successful storyteller. It's a hard pinch, said the stranger, but I think I can help you. So Stevenson is successful insofar as he elicits the right kind of response from the stranger. The stranger proposes a journey into hell. Your old laird is disturbed in his grave by your curses, a common enough belief at the time, so we're told. If you dare venture to go to see him, he will give you the receipt. They arrive at an uncanny version of the house. But that he knew the place was 10 miles off, my good sire would have thought he was at Red Gauntlet Castle. Seeing the late Dougal again, Stevenson simply does not believe him to be dead. Ha, Dougal, are ye living? I thought ye had been dead. Fiction and reality collapse together. In fact, the whole scene is almost an exact replica of the late laird's setup. There was as much singing of profane songs and burling of red wine and speaking blasphemy and skullduggery as had ever been in Red Gauntlet Castle when it was at the blithest. A satirical parade of ghastly historical figures flashed before us. Among them, Dumbarton Douglas, the twice-turned traitor both to country and king. A Gothic spectacle, the scene captures in glimpses the grimaces of the ghouls, despite their spirited carousing. And the wild sounds made my good sire's very nails grow blue and chilled the marrow in his veins. And again, that vividness of detail makes us feel as if we're almost part of the story, and we're certainly reacting the same way as mere audience members at a remove. Fully cognizant of the devilishness at play, Stevenson refuses to take the white-hot pipes offered to him, even though he knows all of the ghastly songs enjoyed by the anti-Covenanters. Gnash against teeth, the thwarted ghost of Sir Robert finally hands Stevenson the receipt he came for. Before leaving, Stevenson heeds some final words, the sort of prophetic words a character in a tale would be foolish to ignore. Here we do nothing for nothing, and you must return on this very day 12th to pay me, your master, the homage that you owe me for my protection. But that is not the end of the tale, or rather, a whole new but related episode gets underway. Stevenson takes his newly acquired proof to the current laird. Sir John looked at every line and at every letter with much attention, and at last at the date, which my good sire had not observed. From my appointed place, he read, this 25th of November. And then we have a dash on the page. Sir John quickly realizes that this postdates his father's death. In a post-Ossianic culture attuned to clever fakes, the putatively forged document has a major blunder. Like oral stories, documents remain prone to human interference. Rightly outraged by what he construes to be a poorly judged joke at his family's expense, Sir John threatens Stevenson. When Stevenson promises to tell him about his improbable meeting with his deceased father, he paused, composed himself, and desired to hear the full history. Never has Stevenson's storytelling skills been so important as now. My good sire told it to him from point to point, as I have told it you, word for word, neither more nor less. Making such a claim for unembellished storytelling, for a full history, Willie validates his grandfather's skills as well as his own in the retelling of the tale. It works. Sir John is convinced enough to at least investigate further. If he is lying, Steenson will have a red-hot iron driven for his tongue, a damning, conclusive fate for any tale-teller. In a partial replaying of Dougal and Hutchins' Gothic mini-story, in which they answered the bell of their late master, Sir John ventures to the dubious site. To tie the episodes together, Scott even has Hutchin make a reappearance as the guide. It was a dangerous place to climb, for the ladder was old and frail and wanted un or twa rounds. However, up got Sir John and entered the narrow door, where his body stopped the only little light that was in the bit turret. Something flees at him with a vengeance, mace down him back o'er, bang gaed the knight's pistol, and Hutchin, that held the ladder, and my good sire that stood beside him, hears a loud skillach. So again, the description is incredibly vivid and immersive. Even we almost feel like we're there amidst the action, but the action is slight. Sir John merely climbs a ladder, gets spooked, and fires his weapon. Ever the master storyteller, Willie creates tension in the delivery of the detail. Sir John has shot Major Weir, the monkey, assuming we should take the derisive label jackanapes literally, and the body is flung down the ladder. He has also found the missing money. Making amends with Steenson, Sir John considers the situation to be happily resolved. He even begins to rebuild his family's reputation by hushing up the story. You are sensible that ill-dispositioned men might make bad constructions upon it concerning his soul's health. Finally, he tosses the recovered receipt, our major, perhaps only textual evidence, money aside, into the fire. By recounting the real events, in scare quotes, the real version of events to others, in the avowedly unaltered retelling by his grandson, Steenson fails to heed his new master's request. Instead, he thrives as a storyteller, retelling, recounting, revisiting the original story. We might wonder if Steenson's account has been affected by Sir John's wishes in some way. And are there elements of the story that have just simply been cut off or hidden from us? After all, Willie says that Sir John made up his story about the jackanape as he liked himself, and some believe till this day there was no more in the matter than the filching nature of the brute. Has Steenson left something out of our extant version, beyond Sir John's casual killing of the monkey? Perhaps it is a complete fabrication. Is Major Weir really a victim or a villain? Conversely, does that short episode make up the basic story that Sir John has been telling, retelling, embellishing above all? And in what ways does he embellish the story, if at all? Some unnamed folk certainly think he embellishes the story. It was not the devil they saw on Sir Robert's coffin, but the capering monkey. It was not the ghost of Sir Robert ringing the bell to summon Dougal to his death. The filthy brute could do that as well as the laird himself, if no better. Despite Sir John's concern, it's not really the Red Gauntlet's name under threat here, but Steenson's own and his reputation as a reliable storyteller. After the minister's wife spread the tale, long after Sir John's death, Steenson was obliged to tell the real narrative to his friends. And I think that's an interesting way of thinking. His friends are a very specific audience. His friends, does that refer to a larger community, the local community? Or does he have to be selective with his audience? Who gets to listen to this wandering tale, and why? Is it kind of a sort of subterranean story beneath the official aristocratic version of the events? Is this the real story from below, as it were? Ostensibly a salacious account of the Red Gauntlets, the tale-teller shapes the story for his own benefit. Now the telling of the tale is ended, Willie reshapes it again for present purposes. My conductor, writes Darcy Latimer, finished his long narrative with this moral. You see, Berkey, it is nae chancy thing to take a strange traveller for a guide when you are in an uncouth land. Darcy thinks the moral is misapplied. Your grandfather's adventure was fortunate for himself, whom it saved from ruin and distress, and fortunate for his landlord also, whom it prevented from committing a gross act of injustice. Alternatively, we might wonder if it is the story that has been misapplied to the moral, having been buffeted and polished for the sake of Sir John Steenson and others. Either way, Willie has more than fulfilled the brief set out by Darcy Latimer. A law student, we are told, tired of my studies and rambling about for exercise and amusement. Only later will he realize the full symbolic importance of Wandering Willie's tale. A literary sample for the student, the tale wanders back into Red Gauntlet and into his life many chapters later. Let me now bring this talk to a conclusion with some final remarks. So in this talk, I've focused on what is perhaps the most famous, most successful, certainly the most recognizable of Scott's wandering tales, by which I mean short stories that can be extracted from larger novels. The other two major examples that you might be familiar with are Dougal's narrative, which appeared in Anne of Geierstein, or The Maiden in the Mist, in 1829, towards the end of Scott's career. Perhaps even more famously, The Fortunes of Martin Waldeck, which appeared in The Antiquary, Scott's third novel, which was published in 1816. In those two wandering tales, as with Wandering Willie's tale, the speakers, the tale tellers, the speakers of the story have multiple goes at delivering the same material, and they adjust the material in line with audience expectations within the book. And it's a wonderful technique that allows Scott to riff on the structural tensions between oral and print delivery. Fundamentally, I think Scott was fascinated with the notion of being a storyteller amidst the rise of print culture. And of course, he spent a lot of his youth and adulthood speaking with storytellers, tracing sort of an oral inheritance, if you like. And many of his stories, including many of the pieces in Chronicles of the Canongate, his only short story collection, in effect, rely on sort of familial figures to supply that material. In short, then, I think we do Scott a disservice if we don't pay attention to his mastery of short story techniques, but we must do so against the larger fabric of his career as an author. Finally, then, I wish to thank again the Council of the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club and the Department of English at the University of Edinburgh for the opportunity to deliver this joint lecture. I hope to see you in 2021 for the larger celebrations of Sir Walter Scott. Thank you for your time.